Hi, Assassins. I'm Brooke.
And I'm Cami.
Welcome to Bookish Realms.
We're just two girls who can't stop talking about fantasy books.
Today, we're diving headfirst into what's probably consumed every spare minute of our lives lately, SJM and the Maasverse. Seriously, if you've ever looked up from your book, dazed, realizing it's 3 a.m. because SJM's characters just won't let you sleep, well, you're not alone. Welcome to our What is the Maasverse episode.
And if you're like us, where 1 minute you're innocently reading ACOTAR because someone said Reese is the perfect book boyfriend, and the next you're building intricate theory webs about how Crescent City and ACOTAR are connected, you've probably also wondered, how did we get here?
The short answer? SJM has cast a spell on us, and we've all fallen hard for her incredible characters, wild twists, and intricate worlds. But don't worry, today we're breaking it all down for you. Whether you're new to the Maasverse or a seasoned fan, this episode will help you see the bigger picture. We are so excited to get into this and break it down with you. Next week, you can expect a Maasverse Connections episode for Throne of Glass, the first book in the series. Then, we'll start posting weekly for Crown of Midnight. Before we continue, we want to give you a huge spoiler warning for all of the Maasverse. There will be spoilers for all 3 series in this episode, including the most recent book in the Crescent City series, House of Flame and Shadow.
Let's kick off with a quick overview of the 3 main series that make up the Maasverse, her most prominent works so far. First, we have Throne of Glass, which follows the fierce assassin Celaena Sardathian through a journey of self-discovery, redemption, and epic battles against ancient forces. We watch her grow into and become the Queen of Terrasen and the Fairy Queen of the West. As you know, this is the series we're currently deep diving. Then there's A Court of Thorns and Roses, or ACOTAR, for those in the know, which starts off as a loose Beauty and the Beast retelling before exploding into high fantasy, political intrigue, and intense romance. I mean, it's practically a rite of passage at this point to cry over Rhysand.
And finally, we have Crescent City. It's an urban fantasy, but with SJM's signature flair for sweeping romances and high-stakes drama. Bryce Quinlan's world is a modern, magic-infused society, but it is no less brutal or fascinating than the ancient lands of her other series.
So, if you're wondering where to start or how these stories all fit together, this is the episode for you. We're giving you an overview of each series and then exploring some of the themes and connections that make the Maasverse so mind-consuming.
So, let's start with Throne of Glass, where it all began. The first book in the series, also titled Throne of Glass, was published in 2012. This series starts by following Celaena Sardathian, an 18-year-old assassin who's been in prison for over a year in the salt mines of Endovier. She's given an opportunity for freedom by competing in the contest to become the king's champion. But of course, that's just the tip of the iceberg. What begins as a story about a badass assassin soon evolves into something much larger, with ancient magic, secret plots, and characters that will break your heart in all the best ways.
And while it starts off with a bit of a YA feel, think epic competitions, friendships, and first loves, it quickly gets darker, more mature, and complex. By the later books, you're dealing with deep themes of destiny, power, sacrifice, and the burdens of leadership. Plus, the world building is amazing with multiple kingdoms, magical creatures, and hidden histories. What I love about Throne of Glass is the character growth. Celaena is not your typical hero. She's flawed, broken, and at times self-serving. But her journey to becoming something more, someone who fights for others, is so compelling.
And of course, one of the most jaw-dropping reveals is when Celaena blooms into Aelin Ashriver Galathinius, the rightful queen of Terrasen. That reveal of her hidden identity is hands down one of the most impressive we've ever read, and it redefines everything you thought you knew about her.
And it's not just Aelin. Every side character is given room to grow, making each character feel so real by the end of the series.
Exactly. It's all about redemption, baby, but also about finding strength in your own identity. And that's a theme that carries through all of SJM's works.
Now, let's talk A Court of Thorns and Roses, better known as ACOTAR. The first book in the series was released in 2015. At first glance, it feels like a familiar tale. A young mortal girl named Farah kills a wolf in the woods, only to discover it was actually a fairy in disguise. She's dragged into the Fae world as punishment, and this is where the Beauty and the Beast vibe kicks in. But, and this is a huge but, the story soon veers into a completely different territory.
Yes, it starts with Feyre navigating life in the Fae lands and her complicated relationship with Tamlin. But by book 2, everything changes. The stakes get higher, the characters become richer, and we get to fall in love with Rhysand as Feyre falls for him. Suddenly, you're also dealing with politics, alliances, war, moral dilemmas, and ancient books and beings filled with information that can change it all.
A big reason ACOTAR has such a loyal fan base is because it's about transformation. Farah's journey is all about reclaiming her power, redefining herself, and finding her place in this dangerous new world. The series also explores choice in a really unique way, whether it's personal choices about love and destiny or massive world-changing decisions. ACOTAR got so many people into SJM and fantasy.
And while Feyre's story is central in the first few books, the focus shifts to her sister, Nesta, in A Court of Silver Flames. Nesta's journey is all about healing from deep trauma, learning to accept herself, and battling her own inner demons. It's darker, more introspective, and explores themes of self-worth and redemption in a really powerful way.
Right, and Nesta's arc feels like a whole new chapter for the series. It's raw and intense with an emphasis on personal growth, mental health, and finding strength in vulnerability. Plus, the romance? Let's just say it's steamy.
Very. We come to Crescent City. This series, starting with House of Earth and Blood, which was published in 2020, takes a slightly different approach. It's urban fantasy, so we're in a modern world with cell phones, skyscrapers, and bars, but with a twist. The world is filled with magic, angels, shifters, fae, and ancient beings with immense power. Our main character, Bryce Quinlan, is a half-fae party girl who's thrown in the middle of a brutal conspiracy after a personal tragedy.
What's really cool about Crescent City is how SJM blends the familiar with the fantastical. On one hand, you have Bryce dealing with grief and friendship and all these very human emotions. On the other, she's up against creatures older than time and supernatural politics that could destroy everything.
The central themes revolve around loss, justice, and finding the strength to keep going when everything falls apart. And, as always, there's amazing characters with their own emotional journeys and relationships that you just fall in love with.
Not to mention the bombshells SJM drops at the end of House of Sky and Breath, which directly links Midgard and Prythian. Crescent City changed a lot of what we thought we knew about the Maasverse.
One of the reasons SJM has such a devoted following is the depth of themes she weaves into her stories. Her books aren't just about adventure and romance. They deal with some really big universal ideas that hit deep and keep you emotionally tied to these worlds, characters, and their journeys.
Definitely. One of the most prominent themes across all her series is transformation and identity. Whether it's Farah becoming Fae and discovering her power, or Selena evolving into Aelin, Kale overcoming his guilt and the loss of his identity as a good soldier in Tower of Dawn, and Nesta facing her trauma and climbing that mountain. SJM's main characters often undergo these incredible personal, physical, or magical changes.
Exactly. There's a deep emotional transformation that really sticks with you. Each character is struggling to figure out who they really are, where they fit, and how to handle the weight of their past. For example, Feyre goes from a struggling human hunter to a high lady of the Night Court, and that journey is as much about her internal growth as it is about external power.
And then you've got power and politics. This is huge in SJM's world. Whether we're talking about the courts of Prythian and ACOTAR, the multiple kingdoms and Throne of Glass, or the supernatural hierarchies in Crescent City, power plays a central role. Characters are constantly grappling with who holds power, who's trying to seize it, and how they themselves fit into these dynamics.
Right. And it's not just about political power, but also personal power. How much control someone has over their own life and choices. It ties into another key theme, love and loyalty. Romance is central in all three series, but it's not your typical fairy tale love. It's intense, complicated, and deeply emotional, with characters often forced to make sacrifices or face huge challenges to stay together. Yes, the relationships in SJM's books aren't just romantic, they're about friendships and found family. Whether it's the Night Court in ACOTAR, Aelin's Court in Throne of Glass, or Bryce's crew in Crescent City, these characters form incredibly tight-knit groups that become their chosen families. Without these friendships, overcoming their obstacles would be impossible.
SJM really drives home the idea that blood doesn't always define family, and those bonds can sometimes be even stronger.
Oh, for sure. And these connections are also what give the characters strength when they face some of the most difficult choices in the series, which leads us to another key theme, morality and sacrifice. In each series, the heroes often find themselves in morally gray situations where there's no easy answer. Whether it's deciding between love and duty, personal happiness and the greater good, or even choosing who lives and who dies, SJM forces her characters to confront tough decisions.
And it's not just about what's right or wrong. It's about the sacrifices they have to make along the way. Aelin's willingness to give up everything for Terrasen, Farah sacrificing herself for her sisters, or Bryce confronting her own pain and loss for the sake of her city. Those moments cut deep.
Exactly. That's what makes SJM's books so much more than just a fantasy adventure. They're these emotional journeys where we, the readers, get to explore human nature, relationships, and the consequences of the choices that we make.
Now, we can't talk about the Maasverse without diving into world building. SJM has created these incredibly detailed, immersive worlds that draw you in from the very first page.
Yes, each of her series has a distinct world with its own rules, magic systems, and cultures. Let's start with Throne of Glass, my favorite of the three. The world of Aurelia is a sprawling land with multiple kingdoms, each with its own rich history and mythology. You've got places like Otterland, Terrasen, Elwë, and Wendelin, each with distinct political systems and magical legacies. And what's fascinating is how the history of these kingdoms directly impact the present-day characters.
Then there's the magic system, which starts off almost hidden but becomes central to the series. Early on, you see hints of ancient magic, but as Selena/Aylin's story unfolds, we get more into word marks, word gates, and the lost magic of Aurelia. And who can forget the moment when the truth about Selena's past and her identity as Aylin Ashford Galathinius, the rightful queen of Terrasen and fire-breathing bitch queen, is revealed. That moment is such a game changer, and it ties into the larger mythology of the world.
Totally. SJM does this great job of layering in magic slowly, and by the end of the series, you're dealing with gods, ancient prophecies, and world-shattering powers.
Then you've got the ACOTAR universe, where the courts of Prythian take center stage. Each court is based on a season or time of day. There's a spring court, night court, summer court, and so on. The magic here is tied to these courts, with High Lords having powers connected to their realms, but also with deeper ancient magic like the Cauldron and the Surreal.
I love the court systems. It's such a unique take on the Fae lore. And SJM really pushes the boundaries by adding layers of political intrigue and complex relationships between the courts.
The magic system in ACOTAR evolves too, especially as Farah gains powers from multiple courts, which becomes a major point in later books. We also see a lot more about ancient magical objects like the Book of Breathings, the Ouroboros, and the Dread Trope, which tie into the larger mythology.
Exactly. And then there's Crescent City, which is an entirely different beast. It's an urban fantasy world, so you've got modern city with technology, but it's also full of magic. The world building here is incredible because it blends the familiar with the fantastical. You've got skyscrapers, cell phones, but also angels, fays, shifters, and ancient gods walking the streets. It's like our world, but with layers of magic and supernatural politics underneath.
And SJM introduces a whole new hierarchy of power in Crescent City, with houses that organize the different magical creatures and supernatural beings. There's also the Asteri, these godlike rulers who have their own dark secrets. The magic system here is more urban and modern, but it's still rooted in ancient magic. And Bryce's journey uncovers how much of it is still intertwined with the history of their world.
That's the cool thing about the Maasverse. Even though each series has a different feel, the world building is so rich that you can easily see how they might be connected. There's a lot of speculation about how these worlds could collide, especially after the release of House of Sky and Breath and House of Flame and Shadow, which literally brought these worlds together.
Yes, it's so exciting because SJM's world building feels like it's been leading to something bigger. We've already seen crossover references, and fans, us included, are constantly theorizing how Throne of Glass, ACOTAR, and Crescent City could be linked. The idea that these worlds could be part of a shared universe is just mind-blowing.
We are so excited for ACOTAR 6. Hopefully we get a name drop soon.
Please. Okay, we've talked about world building and magic, but one of the key reasons people love SJM's books is her characters. Each series is packed with dynamic and layered characters who go through massive transformations. SJM loves exploring complex relationships, romantic and platonic, that evolve over time. And let's be real, the romantic tension in these books is chef's kiss.
Absolutely. So let's start with some of the common character archetypes Maas is known for. First up, we have the badass warrior woman, Selena Sardathian / Aylin Ashriver Galathinius, Feyre Archeron, Bryce Quinlan, all strong, independent, but also deeply flawed characters who carry the weight of the world on their shoulders.
Yes, and what's great about them is that they're not invincible or perfect. They have real struggles, both emotionally and physically. Selena's journey in particular is not just about her being this incredible assassin, but also about confronting her trauma, her past, and her identity as Aylin, the Queen of Terrasen. She transforms from someone focused on survival to someone who fights for others, making it one of the best character arcs we've ever read.
And SJM doesn't shy away from showing these characters at their lowest points. There's grief, there's pain, and there's tons of inner conflict. With Feyre, for example, she starts out in ACOTAR just trying to survive, doing whatever it takes to keep her family fed. But over the course of the series, we see her evolve into a high fae who challenges ancient power structures and comes into her own. The same goes for Bryce in Crescent City, whose journey is so deeply tied to her grief and finding her strength after tragedy.
And then you've got the male love interests who are just as complex. SJM loves to twist the idea of alpha males. Yes, they're strong and protective, but they're also deeply vulnerable. Characters like Rowan, Rhysand, and Hunt are all these powerful warrior types, but they're also emotionally intelligent and willing to take a step back to let the woman shine.
As they should. Um, but anyways, Rhysand is a perfect example of this. In ACOTAR, he's introduced as this morally gray character who's literally hidden in the shadows. But as the series progresses, you see his layers unfold. He's a leader who carries the burden of protecting his people, but he also becomes a true partner to Feyre, supporting her growth and agency, except in A Court of Silver Flames. But don't get us started on that right now. And that's a common thread with SJM's male characters. They're not here to overshadow the woman, but to complement them.
Yes, and let's not forget the relationships between the side characters. SJM does an amazing job of building deep friendships and found families. We see it in Throne of Glass with the court Aelin builds around her, especially with characters like Lysandra, Alide, and Manon, who all start off with their own agendas but evolve into allies and friends. And in ACOTAR, Feyre's inner circle becomes this tight-knit group that's more family than anything else.
Right. The found family theme is so strong in all her books. It's not just about romance, it's about loyalty, friendship, and building those connections with people who understand you. In Crescent City, Bryce and Danica's friendship is the heart of the first book, and it's so refreshing to see female friendships given that much emotional weight.
And speaking of relationships, we have to talk about Kael Westfall in Throne of Glass. I've texted Brooke about this so many times, I know she's tired of hearing about it. I am a Kael defender until the end. He starts out as the loyal soldier, the perfect example of someone who lives by duty and honor. But as the series progresses, we see that unravel. Kael grapples with the consequences of his choices, his unwavering loyalty to a corrupt king, and how his black and white view of the world is shattered. It's a painful but fascinating arc to watch because as the good soldier archetype breaks down, Kael is forced to rebuild himself and redefine who he is, especially in Tower of Dawn, where his healing journey is explored in depth.
Yes, his journey is so intense, and that breakdown of his beliefs and identity is a great example of how SJM handles character growth. No one gets to stay the same in these books. Everyone evolves. It's not just the badass warrior or love interest. It's characters like Kael, who start out grounded in one role and are then challenged to confront their deepest flaws.
And let's talk about the slow burn romances for a second, because SJM is the queen of slow burn. The way she builds up tension between characters over multiple books is masterful. You feel every longing glance, every bit of unspoken tension, and when the characters finally come together, it's so satisfying. Whether it's Aelin and Rowan, Feyre and Rhysand, or Bryce and Hunt, the romance is always so good.
And the payoff is always worth the wait. SJM doesn't rush her romances. They develop naturally alongside the characters' individual growth. And let's not forget the intense, sometimes messy love triangles, like with Selena, Dorian, and Kael.
And it's not just about romantic relationships. SJM is also so good at writing strong mentor and mentee dynamics, like Aelin and Rowan, or the way Rhysand acts as both a partner and a guide to Feyre. These relationships are crucial to the character's development, and they show how heroes don't have to go at it alone. They're surrounded by people who help them become the best versions of themselves.
That's what makes these books so relatable, despite the epic fantasy setting. Yes, there's magic and world-shattering stakes, but at their core, they're stories about people holding on to hope and finding their place in the world, and the relationships that help them get there, whether it's love, friendships, or mentorships. The characters' connections to each other is what makes the story so emotional.
Let's get into magic systems. Each series presents its own unique universe with slightly different dynamics.
In Throne of Glass, magic is a double-edged sword. Magic is banned until Queen of Shadows, which is the 5th book in the series. The reintroduction of magic after it's banned affects everything from characters' abilities to the fate of the entire kingdoms. We see how characters like Aelin wield fire magic, showcasing both its power and its dangers. It's such a fascinating take on how magic can empower but also corrupt. The powers in this series are also more elemental than in her other series. Think fire, ice, and wind.
Yes, and moving on to ACOTAR, we see a different approach to magic, particularly with the division of the courts. Night, dawn, day, and so on. The magic is tied to each court. When Feyre is brought back to life, she receives a drop of power/magic from each of the High Lords.
The way Feyre's understanding of magic evolves throughout the series is also a great introduction for us as readers. She starts out as a mortal navigating a world filled with powerful fae, and as she grows, she learns to harness her own magical abilities, especially in A Court of Mist and Fury. We get to follow along and learn about magic as she does, She creates badass water wolves with the magic from the summer court. She can shift into wings with her shape-shifting powers from the spring court. And she's a Demati, or mind reader, like Rysand.
Then we get to Crescent City, which blends modern elements with a magical world. Bryce's city is filled with technology, but there are also ancient beings and magical creatures that all coexist. The urban fantasy setting makes the magic feel more immediate and relatable, especially when we see how it intertwines with the daily lives of the characters.
I like how each series has its own flavor of magic.
And one thing that ties all these worlds together is the lore. There are threads that connect each series with recurring themes, symbols, and even characters. The way she weaves these elements together creates a universe, a Maasverse, that fans love to dissect and discuss.
It's true, and the world building goes beyond just geography and magic. It also delves into the societal norms and hierarchies of each setting. SJM explores themes of oppression, rebellion, and the struggle for power.
Now, we can't wrap up this exploration of SJM's series without discussing the infamous Maasverse, the interconnected universe that fans have speculated about for years. What started as a fan theory has been confirmed by SJM herself, and it adds an incredible layer of depth to her stories.
The seeds for the Maasverse were planted early on, especially in Throne of Glass, where the concept of multiple worlds is hinted at. From the very beginning, it felt like there was more beyond than what we were seeing.
Exactly. One of the first confirmations of the Maasverse comes from Kingdom of Ash, where we see Aelin literally falling through worlds. She falls through Prythian and Crescent City, as well as some other mystery worlds. This moment opened up the Maasverse.
And then in House of Earth and Blood, we get even more evidence with Jessica's library, which includes books from Throne of Glass, like The Walking Dead, and ACOTAR, such as the Book of Breathings. These books tied the worlds together. These books made their way to Midgard somehow, or the worlds share a history in some way.
Another major hint comes from House of Sky and Breath. The Asteri keep records of the planets they've explored and conquered. Bryce finds these records behind a door labeled Dusk.
And then the moment in House of Sky and Breath where Bryce travels to Prythian. This crossover moment had us on the floor because it brought these two worlds together. This unlocked so much lore in history, especially about how Prythian Fae are the ancestors of the Midgard Fae.
Right, and the reveal of the cauldron being the Asteri's kill switch for Prythian is another scary but crazy connection. It's a powerful object that ties into the lore of ACOTAR, giving us even more shared mythology.
And in House of Flame and Shadow, we learn about Lydia's lineage, which is tied back to Brandon, a character from Throne of Glass. Even though she's in Midgard, this kind of lineage connection strengthens the idea that all these characters and stories are woven together in some way. We just don't know how yet.
SJM, please give it to us. Give it to me, Sarah.
The revelation of the Maasverse has sparked so much excitement and speculations amongst fans. It's a testament to SJM's intricate storytelling and world building that these connections spark literal thousands of theories. Readers love diving into the lore and finding all the little hints that tie these worlds together.
For sure. And as we continue to explore each series, we'll be keeping an eye out for even more connections.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode, where we explored the amazing world of SJM and the confirmation of the Maasverse.
We're so excited to delve deeper into these connections in our next episode, where we'll focus on Throne of Glass. Now that we've completed our deep dives into this book, we'll be focusing on both the major and minor links we discovered during our reread. Plus, we'll share some of our theories based on these connections.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok, where our handle is @BookishRealmsPod.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on the Maasverse and any connections you noticed in your own reading, so drop us a comment or send us a message. Also, leave us a rating if you like what you heard. It really helps us out.
Bye!